Congressman, you have said in mail, in TV commercials multiple times, you made allegations that are totally untrue about $716 billion that you claim I want to take from Medicare, from seniors. When in fact, you, Congressman, have voted twice for the Ryan budget, which would take $716 billion, not a coincidence that the exact same number, that same $716 billion, that would change the way providers are paid. And you voted twice for that in the Ryan budget, with the big difference being that you in the Ryan budget took that $716 billion so that you could use it to fund tax breaks for billionaires and big oil companies. Whereas the Affordable Care Act took that, again, changed the way providers are paid with that same $716 billion, and they put it directly into health care for our citizens. So, Congressman, which is it? You say now that your votes for the Ryan budget were wrong, both of them?
No, the underlying assumption of the question is wrong. First of all, I'm not for tax breaks for oil companies or billionaires. So let's just get that straight. I am not going to vote to cut the tax for any billionaire or any oil company. That's not going to happen, number one. Number two, the $716 billion that my opponent is referring to is the money that was taken from Medicare, an important program for our nation's seniors, already underfunded according to the Medicare Trustees. They've written a report, you can see it on the internet, Google Medicare Trustees June 2012. The report will come up, they'll tell you that Medicare goes insolvent in the year 2024 if we do nothing. So rather than save and secure and strengthen Medicare, which I voted for in the United States Congress, to save it for every senior, every beneficiary, and anybody that's about to retire, to make sure that that promise of Medicare is kept. What President Obama did, and for the life of me I can't figure out, because Ms. Buchor was not in Congress when the bill was passed, why she continues to defend it. It was a bad bill, it's an unpopular bill, and perhaps the most odious portion was that it took $715 billion out of Medicare to pay for Obamacare, to pay for a new entitlement that we couldn't afford for a generation who hadn't yet earned it. Essentially using Medicare as the piggy bank to pay for the new entitlement. I know I've heard, and I just heard it here again today, that I have voted to take funds from Medicare. It just isn't true. It didn't happen.
1 minute rebuttal each.
I'll start with this. So, if you have been working so hard to strengthen Medicare, maybe I shouldn't ask this the question. Congressman Fitzpatrick says he's working really hard to strengthen Medicare. But in fact, the Alliance for Retired Americans, who do an annual report card of all legislators, have given grades to all legislators for their votes relating to seniors. For example, Paul Ryan, who's the architect of the Paul Ryan budget, got a grade of 10 from the Alliance. Congressman Fitzpatrick was judged to be even more harmful to seniors because he received a grade of 0 for his votes relating to seniors. I'm very proud to be endorsed by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, because I do believe in strengthening Medicare, and I do believe to not burdening seniors with the benefits that Congressman has voted for, to make sure that we continue the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest 1% to 2% of Americans, and talk about not paying their fair share. Look, Americans support ending the wealthiest 1% to 2% Bush tax cuts by a 2-to-1 margin. This is not something that should be even in the least bit controversial, Congressman.
Congressman, 1 minute.
There are many organizations, they all have very nice sounding names. They're funded by other organizations that have a political agenda. Some will endorse Democrats, some will endorse Republicans. The 60-plus organization of senior citizens has endorsed me. The Fraternal Order of Police has endorsed me. The firefighters have endorsed me. Numerous building trades organizations have endorsed me. The National Federation of Independent Businesses have endorsed me. Many organizations have endorsed me. Some have endorsed my opponent. What's more important is not what someone else says, including the national parties, whether they be Democrat or Republican. Not what somebody else says about a particular candidate that's seeking your vote, but what that candidate has said. And perhaps more important, what that candidate has done. Which candidate has a proven record of bringing things like a national cemetery to our community, preserve 10,000 acres of open space. We should cross the aisle, balance budgets. I'm the only candidate in this race that's voted to save, strengthen, and protect Medicare and balance budgets on the local level. And I want to bring that kind of Bucks County common sense to the nation's capital because they need it.
opportunity to ask the next question of Mrs. Booker.
One of the most important issues, there are many issues, joblessness among veterans, the national debt. One that has not had a lot of discussion here today is the issue of health care, which is probably the reason I decided to seek election back in January 2010 as a beneficiary due to a very difficult diagnosis of outstanding medical care. And I'm concerned that the approach the current administration is taking with respect to health care is that if the government continues to take over health care, it's not just me, Mike Fitzpatrick, talking about this. It's the physicians. That the quality of our health care is going to go down. The things in that health care bill that my opponent continues to support and defend, things like the Independent Payment Advisory Board. It's a group of 15 unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats that, according to physicians, are going to be in the examination room between you and your doctor making decisions. I would ask my opponent, why do you continue to defend the most odious, terrible provisions of Obamacare, like the Independent Payment Advisory Board, when physicians throughout Bucks County and individuals that have written letters to the local newspapers vehemently oppose it?
Congressman, thank you for asking that question. If you've been talking to the voters of Bucks and Montgomery County, you would actually find that the huge majority of Bucks County, Montgomery County residents support the huge majority of this bill. This is not a perfect bill. It is not the bill I would have written. There's a lot that needs to be fixed in it. I've said that from day one, from before it was passed and after it was passed. And I'll tell you, but to start with, we all, I think, would agree that the single most important thing is to make sure that our neighbors and our friends and our family members, are not receiving their medical care in the emergency rooms. When they do that, it's bad for our health, it's bad for moral reasons, and frankly, it's bad for our pocketbooks. The Affordable Care Act, though not perfect by a long stretch, takes great strides in making sure that's not happening. It's critical that this law ends the pre-existing condition exclusion so that sick Americans can get coverage. It's critical that this bill allows us to cover our children until they're 26. It's critical that this bill allows people to get preventative care without co-pays in many cases, without deductibles. This is taking great strides towards making sure that our citizens get the health care that they need. And at the same time, there's so many things that we need to be doing to make this law better. For example, I would push even further for cost containment. I would push even further to make sure that this law is not a burden for individuals or for businesses. This is a critical piece of it. We need to make sure that as these provisions are going into effect, that we make this the best bill it can be without being a burden on anyone. And there's a lot of ways we can start doing that. Cost containment is one of them. How many of you received a check from your insurance companies over the last 6 months paying you back money because they spent too much on administrative costs? I'm one of them. I received a check for over a full month's premium because my insurance company spent 31% of my premium dollars on administrative costs. The Affordable Care Act starts the process of making sure that doesn't happen again.
1 minute rebuttal each.